The trial of Laurie Shaver, well, it is coming to the close, at least as of right now, when I'm recording this on Friday afternoon, the 13th. It's Friday the 13th. I just realized that, Bob.
Hmm.
So we may have a verdict by the time you're watching this or listening to this, but we're going to give you a little rundown on what this case is all about. Of course, Laurie accused of murdering her husband, Michael Shaver, who disappeared back in 2015. 2018, Michael's remains were found buried in the backyard of their home. Not a good look if your missing husband shows up buried in the backyard. She claims that Michael left with a friend and never returned, but a lot of suspicions arose when she moved in with a new relationship shortly after his disappearance. That's kind of the nutshell of the case. Joining me, Bob Motta, defense attorney, host of the podcast Defense Diaries. And you've been covering this on your channel and even live streaming it. So what was the trial all about? And what did you see over the last few days covering it?
It was a weird one. It's like every time you just start thinking you can't see anything more bizarre and horrifying than the last thing you watch, then another case comes right down the pike. And
Yeah.
this one was, I mean, in a lot of ways, it was, kind of your run of the mill spouse kills another spouse type case.
Mhm.
But this one had X factors, as you stated. Years went by, 3 years went by after Michael kind of vanishes off the face of the earth, and his family starts receiving sporadic text messages from his phone. Uh, uh, Employers, other employees receive a couple text messages from him. There's some posts on his Facebook page. Some people receive messages from his messengers, Facebook Messenger. So there's kind of this thought that, and Laurie is, putting this story out there that he's just abandoned his family and he's gone to start a new life somewhere.
Mhm.
Um, Fast forward to 2018, as you stated, a buddy of his, an old buddy, long time buddy, calls sheriff and says, "Look, I'm not buying like that. My buddy just like vanished off the face of the earth and never is going to contact me again. There's something off about it. I'm calling in a wellness check." So they go over to the house, knock on the door. Lois says, "Oh yeah, come on in." They search the house a little bit. As soon as they talk about going out to check out the fire pit, which is where the concrete slab was laid, and then they built a makeshift fire pit on top of it with weird tree stump seats. Thing looks like we call it Bonehenge, which is probably in bad taste, but
Maybe they were
um,
Odinists. Maybe it was an Odinist altar.
at this point, I can't put anything past anybody. So ultimately, they end up. She says, "Get out of my house!" As soon as they bring up the concrete, uh, you know, the concrete slab, and they come back with a warrant. They start digging. Sadly, they find the remains of Michael Shaver, but yet she's not arrested for a couple years after that. So
How? How?
yeah, it's like obviously the ME cannot really give a time of death with any kind of accuracy because he's skeletal. Essentially, all they can tell is that he was shot in the back of the head. So, I mean, you've got this circumstantial case wherein common sense would seem to dictate who else would have a motive to kill him, who would bury him in his own backyard. I mean, it's like the,
Yes.
the common sense side of it is. So that's where the X factor comes in.
Okay.
So after she's arrested, it then turns out that her then 7-year-old daughter, her daughter was 7 years old in 2015. The story comes to be that her 7-year-old daughter, during the midst of this argument between Michael and Laurie, and he was out of the house at that point. The story was that he came back to the house, and at that point, this huge fight erupts out in the backyard. He's getting very physical with her, and that the 7-year-old goes into the house, goes into her mom's bedstand drawer, pulls out a little pink 38 caliber weapon, proceeds to walk back out to the patio. The father, her father is still, he's seated in the lawn chair, and she walks up behind him and shoots him in the back of the head. Yeah, but the story continues to get weirder. So the man that Lori happens to be dating, this guy named Jeremy Townsend, was there that morning, as it was his habit because his kids go to the same school that Lori's do. He hears the gunshot. The story is that he walks into the house, he grabs the gun away from the child, says, take the kids out of here. I'm going to finish the job. He allegedly shoots Michael again. And by the
Rather than
time
calling
Laurie,
911?
hey, don't ask me, man.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you
Not a
what the story
deer.
is. And so by the time and the story goes, by the time that she gets back, there's no trace of Michael anywhere. And apparently, this Jeremy Townsend guy, according to the defense, has buried Michael in the backyard, unbeknownst to Laurie, who then almost a year later lays that concrete slab, and then they put the fire pit on top of it. So that's the story. That's the defense's story, and obviously the state is of the mindset that's all a bunch of bullshit. The story's ridiculous. But at the end of the day, the defense really just harped on this is a circumstantial case. You don't have anybody that saw Laurie Shaver kill anybody. You've got this injection of two other people that they're claiming are the shooters. You've got, what he considers to just be stacking of social media posts that he's saying, look, yes, there was flowers sent to her boyfriend's wife that were allegedly sent by Michael Shaver. And yes, there were messages sent from Michael Shaver's Facebook Messenger to her boyfriend's wife saying, hey, my wife's a whore and she's sleeping with your husband. I want to meet. So it's like all these things exist in the world. And, the defense is like, look, all these things may exist in the world. However, none of them make her a murderer. Like maybe she's just covering up for her daughter. Maybe she wanted to protect her daughter.
Yeah.
She's got no duty to report the crime. So yeah, it was a crazy trial. It was a crazy
Where
trial.
where is Jeremy Townsend today?
He came in and testified on behalf of the state.
So,
Denied it all.
okay, so he's not saying that any of this happened. He's not
Well,
saying
he, he admitted to the affair.
okay, but that's it.
So,
Okay.
but he denied
Yeah.
shooting
Okay.
Michael,
Okay.
denied that he was there that day. And it's like, I was like, well, where's the phone data? Like, if I'm the state,
Yeah.
I'm seeking to just disprove the state's or the defense's theory altogether by just getting his phone data,
Mhm.
showing that he wasn't at that house at that time on any of the 3 days that we think that it may have occurred. They give a time frame of like November 7th to the 10th. So they didn't come up with that data. So I mean, look, man, you never know what a jury's going to do. You really don't, and if one, like, I mean, look how long the Telus jury went.
Sure. What the daughter testified, correct? The one who
Correct. Yes.
the story by the defense is that she did this, and then, you know,
Right.
mom and boyfriend tried to kind of cover this up because for whatever reason. Um,
Right.
what was her testimony like? I mean, was she believable?
I mean, so at this point she's 15,
Yeah.
right? It sounded rehearsed. I mean, she had a story. In my estimation, you can't just judge on what her voice sounds
Yeah.
like and if she's like stuttering on facts as much as does the story make sense in conjunction with other parts of the story that are coming from other people other than her.
Mhm.
And to me, really the most damning piece of evidence is the fact that I think it was a forensic. I don't know if she was a forensic pathologist or what, but she came in talking about the bones, talking about the skull, talking about the fact that there had been a shot that had gone through the back of the skull. There was no entrance wound, so obviously the projectile was lodged in the brain. Because they did find the projectile. They couldn't get a direct match with any of the multiple guns that they had at the house. But the most striking testimony to me was that there was no evidence whatsoever that there was a second shot.
Mhm.
So when uh, Isabel, the daughter, testified at the age of 15, she said, I walked up behind my father and I shot him in the head, but like nothing happened. And like, so I'm like, what do you mean nothing happened? And I didn't understand he was sitting in a chair until she testified. Cause at first I was like, oh, get an expert to just prove that the trajectory of the bullet, that there's no way a 7-year-old, like you'd
Yeah.
be able to tell that angle. So, like in terms of rebutting that, obviously, story became he was sitting in a chair. That's how they came with. That's how the bullet's going to be straight into the head. So on direct, she basically says nothing happens. That's what she said. But then on cross, she said that he started like shaking, that he was convulsing.
Mhm,
So, which would mean that she shot him in the head,
mhm.
right? So that's what creates the problem when they inject the Jeremy portion of the story, which means that he too shot him in the head, and there's not two bullet wounds.
Which would
So
be
the
found. I mean, that's not
right, right.
debatable. Like
There's no way.
magically, yeah,
Yeah, the forensic anthropologist, I think that's what it was. She was like, there's even if you're doing a double tap, boom, boom, like you're still going to see it's going to look more like a helix.
yeah,
Like you're never going to get two projectiles to go through the exact same hole
sure.
without creating more of a hole one
Mhm.
way or another. So, like, I mean, that evidence was pretty damning to me, and it got really weird because, she is charged with second degree murder, but they also charged her with accessory after the fact as kind of a fallback charge in the event that they can't get her on the second degree murder because she can't be charged with both.
Mhm.
You cannot be an accessory to your own crime.
Okay.
All right. So in that situation, it was befuddling because they included a self-defense or defense of others instruction for the jury.
Mhm.
And I'm like, man, that doesn't make any sense. Like, they're sitting here saying Laurie didn't do it. So, but they included that instruction in the event that they buy the Isabel story.
Mhm.
Okay. And they're saying that she wasn't justified because she snuck up behind her dad and shot him in the head,
Mhm.
which doesn't necessarily make that, but which would be a crime if it's not justified. Right. So, self defense, that's all. A homicide has been committed. It's a question of whether or not it's a justifiable homicide.
Mhm.
That's where self defense comes in. Homicide, but it's justifiable. In this situation, the state is arguing that that wouldn't be justifiable. But like the story is that he was stepping on Laurie's head, like he had his foot on her head while he's sitting, like sitting in the chair, and so. But this instruction comes in and it's going to confuse the jury and it's going to confuse them because they basically have to acknowledge that there's a possibility that this crazy story that they've made up or appear to have made up about the child and Jeremy shooting him is a possibility.
Mhm.
I mean, if it's not a possibility, then why include the accessory after the fact charge? I just think the state made a mistake by charging that because it's showing that the state thinks that there's a possibility that the Isabel story could be true.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? It's a really weird case, man. It's a really weird. So with all those things in consideration, I think that this deliberation could go
Yeah.
for a while. The X factor is always it's a Friday. Does the
Yeah.
jury just want to go home and not come back? So
My other question on this, and you'd mentioned it earlier, why did it take law enforcement so long to investigate this? And I know someone just said he disappeared, but I mean, you said your wife disappeared tomorrow. eh, You'd have authorities at your house. They'd be looking for
no
something.
question,
I mean,
no question.
what was there? I mean, is there something behind the scenes here that we're suspicious about? Where it's like, is there some sort of connection as to why somebody's holding them off? Is there any signs of that, like we've seen in some other cases, or is it just bad police work?
I don't think it was bad police work. They didn't know he was necessarily missing because nobody reported him missing. Like that's the mystery of this is like how family, like, and I'm talking about Michael's family, wasn't like suspicious enough to
Yeah,
call law enforcement and be like, yo, like it is unlike my son or my brother to just fall off the face of the earth.
yeah,
You know what I mean? It's like that's the part of it that I just had a really hard time like comprehending like why like you said, if anybody in my family, I don't care if I haven't talked to them in 10 years.
yeah,
I find out that they've just vanished, and especially if it's a sibling, even
yeah,
if I'm no longer talking with my sibling and there's some kind of issue with a relationship, like why in the world wouldn't somebody be questioning it? Like
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
especially if it was like my sibling or my kid, I'd be like, what do you mean you just fell off the face of the earth? That makes no sense. Like, I want to talk to you. Pick up the phone. I'm calling you. Or
Yes.
where are you at? I'm coming to see you. It's like that doesn't happen for 3 years until this buddy who hears something from his ex-girlfriend who's still friends with Laurie Shaver, who said something to the effect that, Michael no longer walks this earth. That was finally the thing that got somebody to call in and say, hey, do a wellness check. So, and then it took 2 years because that's what I'm saying. It's not an open and shut case in terms
No.
of the evidence. Common sense tells us what happened here, but common sense, you need more in a trial
Yeah.
to convict somebody
I
in
mean,
order to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
is it a battered spouse thing? Where I mean, that sounds like that could be playing part of it.
It
And
could have been.
honestly, it's not that. I mean, in today's world where people have access to weapons and they have them out there in dumb places.
It was a combative relationship.
Yeah.
There was testimony and evidence that there were injunctions put into place.
Yeah.
There was violence in the relationship,
Yeah.
but I mean, she elected not to do that. And when she came up with the "I didn't shoot him" story, my daughter did it. You know what I'm saying? It's like that battered spouse syndrome thing wasn't a thing here because
Yeah. Well, it
she
makes
was she wasn't claiming it was self defense. She's claiming she didn't shoot him. That's what I'm saying. It gets
yeah.
really weird.
Yeah, it's
That
like it's wondering. I'm wondering if like they're injecting more to the story to make it more. I don't know, to take some of the blame off of the daughter. Like that's why the boyfriend's in there because their thought process is we don't want the daughter. I don't know.
it's weird.
It's very weird. I mean, I could see it actually happening in a sort of way. My thought would be, did the rest of the family know that that's what happened, and everybody, including his family, just agree to say, look, he was an abuser. Your granddaughter shot him, and we'd like to just say he ran away because it might be probable that he's a shitty person and might do something like that. And
I,
everybody's just
it,
like
I mean,
let's
that's
protect the
essentially what
girl.
the defense is arguing.
Yeah, yeah,
That Lori was shielding her daughter,
yeah.
but like, how does that factor in with the Jeremy Townsend issue, though?
That's
You
what I
know,
mean. Like
like
to put too much on the scale, almost like. But I wonder about with like the Karen Reed trial, where it's like you didn't need to put more shit on the scale over here to weigh this down. There's enough evidence to point to what actually happened. Uh,
exactly,
that's what I'm.
exactly.
Oh wow. Well, this is
Yeah,
wow. This is going to
it's,
be a fascinating one. I
it's
mean,
an interesting one,
it
man.
sounds like it could end. Obviously, you watched it much closer than I did, but it just kind of has a feeling of like, is this going to be a hung jury? Is it that
All
confusing
it
to
takes
the?
is one. All
Yeah.
it takes is one. I mean, we'll know. We'll know pretty quickly. Like, I know. I have a friend who's sitting there in court, and she said that the jury asked for a whiteboard right away. So, I mean, they're going to go back there and they're going to
Yeah.
deliberate, which is what we want jurors to
Yes,
do.
of course.
We've talked about this before. Like, we're always like, oh yeah, they're going to come back in an hour. Well, we don't want that really.
No.
We want people to carefully consider all the facts and all the evidence. We want them to work it out back there. We want them to actually deliberate. And I mean, I think this is a weird enough case to where just the discussion itself, once they start chatting about it, is going to be a lot of back and forth.
Yeah.
There's bound to be one devil's advocate back there, who's like, but what about this?
Yeah.
Like the defense attorney is who, he sounded like Hank Hill from King of the Hill. He's like, well,
I
Bobby,
heard that.
he's like, what would Mr. Wiggs do? So I'm like, so like one juror is going to say, what would Mr. Wiggs do back there? When kind of
Yeah.
questioning the evidence, like that they're missing a lot of evidence. They don't have key components to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Laurie Shaver committed this crime. Yes, they found the body on the property, but that doesn't mean that she killed him. I mean,
The Mr. Wiggs is good. I got to say,
yeah,
I watched a little bit of her testimony yesterday after we were texting, and I was going to go with Dr. Phil. It sounded like Dr. Phil was exact. Because I'm like, why is Dr.
he
Phil
was the
examining?
original call. He was the original call from the chat. They had him pegged as Dr. Phil. He's like the love child of Dr. Phil, Mr. Garrison from South Park, and of course Hank Hill from King of the Hill.
I can see that.
He's the love child of all three of them, I think.
Wow, that must have been an
Yeah.
interesting night at the Holiday Inn.
Yeah, right. Very weird. Very
Oh,
weird.
wow. Well, okay, so what's your prediction and how this is gonna end up based on everything you saw?
Because of like the kind of the defining evidence for me really is the fact that they're stuck on this two gunshot thing
Yeah.
happen, and the evidence does not support that. I think that that in and of itself is enough for them to come back with a guilty verdict. I think to me that was the key piece of evidence.
They
And,
should have
and I
even
was
introduced
frankly
it.
right, like I was surprised that the state didn't really hammer that home. Like they finally brought it up in the rebuttal closing that there simply aren't two gunshot wounds.
Yeah,
It would be one thing if the child had testified, well, I shot him in the tummy, and then they just never like he's all bones when they recover him. So they wouldn't see that wound. So
sure.
and then they're covered for one gunshot. But the stories are that he was shot twice in the head and there's only one wound.
Why would you even go with that story if you know it
I
can be
don't know.
that's the
I
yeah.
don't I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, another one, another unsolved mystery, essentially.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
Need Robert
exactly.
Stack in here. Hey, thanks for checking out the video. Be sure to follow us wherever you download podcasts, and especially Apple Podcasts, where you can get advanced episode and premium content on our premium channel right there. Also, be sure to follow us on social media so you don't miss any breaking updates on the stories that matter to you most. We're on TikTok, X, Instagram, Facebook. Just search Hidden Killers Podcast with Tony Bruschi, and you'll find us right there. Again, thanks for watching.